All right, welcome to the Temple of the Silver Stars public webinar. My name is Matthew. I'm an academic track instructor in the Temple of the Silver Star. And this will be our fourth out of 7 classes in our Astrological Magic series. So this is the midway point in our class. So just to review real quick where we've been so far, we've been kind of alternating back and forth between more astrologically focused classes and then more ritual and ceremonial and magic focused classes. So in our first class, we talked about the hexagram. We learned the lesser ritual of the hexagram, the real foundational pattern for all the ceremonial work we're doing in this class. Then in our second class, we built up the basic meanings of the planets and some concepts around some traditional and contemporary concepts around the meanings and significations and symbolism and some of the mythology around the planets. And then in our third class, 2 weeks ago, we looked at using the greater ritual of the hexagram to invoke the planetary powers, and we looked at some Kabbalistic symbolism involved in the with the hexagram and then with the planets on the tree of life. Yeah, and then we talked about how to do planetary invocations. So today we're going to be back to real focused on some core astrological concepts, and we're going to build up all the basic concepts of what goes into a horoscope. We're not going to develop any of these in a lot of depth. We'll come back to that in the following weeks. So yeah, today we'll do basic components, basic anatomy of a horoscope. Then 2 weeks from now, we'll zoom in on the signs of the zodiac, both their meanings and their symbolism, as well as we'll talk about how to adapt hexagram rituals to invoke zodiacal powers. And then in the 6th class, we'll again go back to focus on astrology, and we'll build up more detail about the meanings of aspects and astrological houses. And then in our last class, we'll do kind of a mixture of stuff in our last class, a few other bits and pieces of astrology, as well as how to use hexagram rituals to invoke sephirothic powers, which is something we don't talk about very often, but is another possible use of hexagram rituals, is to invoke the sephiroth. And then we'll do some summary and conclusion type stuff and look at some of Crowley's alternate versions of hexagram rituals and some other things as well. All right, so that's where we are. Yeah, let's just jump right into it. All right, so horoscopic astrology. Now, astrology in the broadest sense, of course, is any system for interpreting understanding, how celestial events relate to human lives and to events here on Earth, which of course is developed independently by, if not all, at least many different cultures all throughout human history, and the human's relationship to the stars and planets goes back, tens of thousands of years, if not longer. But when we're talking about the horoscopic astrology in this particular tradition, we're talking about something that definitely begins at a particular place and time and then spreads out from there. So the word horoscope is now in modern astrology, people say, in the modern world, people sometimes talk about a horoscope as like the thing you read in like a horoscope column, like, oh, I'll read my horoscope for the week or something like that. That's really not a great use of the term. It's better to understand the horoscope as like the thing you see there on the right as a particular chart that shows the relationship of the planets in relationship to each other, in relationship to the heavens, as well as their location in the sky at a given moment in a given place in time. So the word horoscope comes from the Greek horoskopos, which means horoscope or nativity or birth chart. And of course, nativity and birth chart are synonyms for each other. And those are horoscope cast for the moment that someone, generally a human, but of course you could use it for any sentient being, that's born at a definite moment in time. Right, so that's a particular type. A birth chart or a nativity is a particular type of horoscope. So the Greek word horoskopos literally means observer of the hour or hour marker, from horo, meaning hour or time, and skopos, meaning observer or watcher. And so originally, the word horoskopos referred to the ascendant, the sign of the zodiac that was rising up over the eastern horizon. But then that gets generalized to talk about the entire chart. And so that's how we'll use the term horoscope, is to talk about, again, this thing you see on the right, a diagram showing the planets, their locations, in the zodiac, their relationships to each other, as well as their locations in the sky at a particular moment in time. And this is the birth that you're seeing here. This is the birth chart of Jack Parsons. I assume a lot of you know who Jack Parsons is. He was an important member of the Thelemic community in the 1940s in California. And was also a pioneering rocket scientist, one of the founders of Jet Propulsion Labs, or Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and a really important pioneer in rocketry. And so I've been working with reading a biography of him and testing and studying some more advanced like astrological timing techniques. And so because I've been working with this chart, I'll just use that as an example for our class. But right now, just showing you what a horoscope looks like. All right, so yeah, I'm not going to get too much into the history, but just real briefly, the tradition of horoscopic, what we're calling horoscopic astrology, which for our purposes is the type of the astrology that we're talking about. This is born in northern Egypt, in Hellenistic Egypt, about 2,200 years ago. It synthesizes a lot of concepts taken from Babylonian and Babylonian Mesopotamian astrology, along with the Egyptian astrological tradition, and synthesizes those together kind of under the perspective and using a lot of the concepts from Greek philosophy and cosmology, and especially Greek geometry and mathematics. So those things come together to produce what we know as horoscopic astrology. And was probably done, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this happened very quickly, possibly by a single individual or a very small group of people over a pretty short span of time. And there's some who have suggested that this may have been something like an inspired or a received thing, that the system came through in some sort of way like that. And some have wanted to identify this, the source of this inspiration as Hermes or as Thoth or Hermes Trismegistus. Of course, we can make up our own minds about that and look into the evidence. And again, the historians are unclear on how exactly that happens, but it's not super important for our purposes here. But it does begin, in northern Egypt about 2,200 years ago, and then spreads all throughout the world after that. Again, there's a lot of really interesting history. We just don't really have time to go through it today. All right, but so in the tradition of horoscopic astrology, in general, we can say that there's four main branches of the tradition. Some of the boundaries between these different things are a little bit fuzzy at times, and especially in different times and places, people understand this a little bit differently. But broadly speaking, we can talk about four main branches of horoscopic astrology. So the first, and this is probably the original branch of horoscopic astrology, is what we call natal astrology. And so this is looking at the birth times of again, generally humans, so casting a chart for the moment of birth. And we'll talk a little bit about why, as we go through, about why it's the birth that is the moment, like as opposed to conception or to some other moment, why that happens in particular, because there are definite reasons for it. And then underneath natal astrology, there's also a lot of like extensions of natal astrology or extensions of the birth chart, things like what are called Time Lord systems, transits, progressions, solar returns. And these are all used for looking at the way that particular times during someone's life, both the timing suggested by the chart itself and different ways of using the birth chart to talk about different times in someone's life, as well as the way that the current locations of the planets, this is what's called transits, current locations of the planets interact with an individual's birth chart. And then we also have what are called synastry, which is looking at the relationship between different people's birth charts. And someone's pointing out medical astrology is another whole sub-discipline. Yeah, that's absolutely true. We could think of that as another like sub-discipline of natal, of course. You'd also be looking at transits and things like that. Yeah, certainly. And synastry is looking at the relationship between different people by looking at their birth chart. Classically, this is for like romantic relationships, but you can do it for, family members, coworkers, friends, anything at all. All right, then next category here, we have Inceptional and Electional Astrology. So Inceptional Astrology is basically the same idea. The interpretive principles are a little bit different in some cases, but basically the same idea with a birth chart. It's just, rather than a birth chart, we're looking at the beginning of really anything that has a definite moment of beginning in time. We can cast a horoscope for that thing and use that horoscope to talk about, how that thing will go or develop. And so this could be, the founding of a country, right? Like, the United States. Well, there's some debate about which is the correct chart to use for the United States, but a lot of people use what's called the Sibley chart, which is set for the early, I forget exactly what time it is, but early afternoon of July 4th, 1776, in Philadelphia, right? The signing of the Declaration of Independence. And so you get other countries as well. The moment that you start a business, the moment that you get married, the moment that you start writing a book, anytime you're beginning something or something like comes into the world at a particular moment, you can cast a chart for that thing and then interpret the chart to talk about, the nature of that thing and how it will go and all that. And then you also have what's called electional astrology, which is, in a sense, like the reverse engineering of inceptional astrology, where once you have the idea that the moment that something begins tells you about how that thing will go, I think you naturally have the idea that you can then choose which moment to begin something. So, if you're going to get married, you could go to an astrologer and have the astrologer look at the coming months and choose a time when you have good indications for a stable, long-lasting, harmonious, happy marriage. So you can choose when to begin something based on choosing a chart that will be auspicious for that thing. Then we also have Mundane Astrology, which is the astrology of like global events and world events. Looking at including things like pandemics can all be studied, and we can look at the astrological signatures of different things and cast charts for different important moments to talk about how periods of time will go for countries and societies and all that. And then finally, this is sort of the odd one out in a way. We have what's called Horary Astrology, which is the use of a horoscope to answer, I guess we could think of as a more like kind of classical, like divinatory question. So the idea is someone comes to an astrologer and asks a question like, should I, invest in this business? And then the astrologer basically, I'm simplifying a little bit, but basically casts a chart for the moment that question is asked, and then uses a particular set of interpretive rules to decide, whether or not the answer to that, often it's to answer like a yes or no sort of question, or something like that. That's all horary astrology. All right, and then here on the image you see on there on the left, that's from the Tarot. That's a personification of astrology there. All right, now we can talk about the primary components of horoscopic astrology, or the primary components of a horoscope. Another image from the Tarot there. This is the muse, one of the classical muses, Urania, who is the muse of astronomy and astrology. All right, so again, boundaries and things like that are a little bit fuzzy, and there are some other things that don't quite fit into these four categories, but these are really the prime main components and the things that we're going to focus on in this series here. So the first of these things, and really the first and foremost, most important of these things, is the planets themselves. And so we've already talked about that we're focusing on the 7 classical planets for our purposes here, and they really are the primary thing. We can really think of everything that happens in astrology and horoscopic astrology as ways of talking about the meanings and significations and how and where and when the planets will express themselves in people's lives and in events and in the nature of people's characters and all that sort of stuff. We're really always talking about the planets. All right, and then we have the signs. This is the signs of the 12 signs of the zodiac, and while they have some of their own significations and meanings, again, especially from the point of view of traditional astrology, the really important thing that the signs of the zodiac are is now I'm using the word domicile here. Domicile is essentially a fancy word for house, but there's something else in astrology called houses. So to avoid confusion, I'll just use the word domicile. but the domicile or dwelling place of the planets. Each one of the signs is essentially owned by one of the planets, and one of the planets lives there and controls that house and has a kind of like dominion or lordship over that place. But the planets move around, and they're often found in each other's domiciles, and then we interpret all of that. All right, and then we also have what are called houses, which is a slightly almost a misleading sort of word, more like in Greek, what we call houses were called topoi, or places, which in a way would be better, perhaps, but we'll just use the modern terminology, the English terminology of houses. And so the houses are divisions of the sky, rather than being like divisions of the heavens. They're divisions of the sky. So they're like anchored to the horizon, the different portions of the sky in a given place at a given time. So they're divisions of the sky as well as divisions of the life, and they signify different areas of life. They also show the planets will be located in one of the houses, and then the location that which house a planet is found in talks both about where in the life that planet will show up, as well as the prominence of the planet. Some of the houses are stronger or more prominent or more active than the other houses. And we'll also see how the planets rule the different houses, and that the planets will take on responsibility for that area of life, depending on which house they rule. All right, and then our fourth main component here is aspects. And these are the relationships between the planets, the relationships that the planets form to each other. Now, for some purposes, we'll also want to think about signs and houses having aspects to each other, and I think that'll become clear as we go along, though primarily we're talking about aspects between planets. All right, and then this last thing here, it doesn't fit exactly into aspects. I kind of grouped it in here. We'll talk about this a little bit in the last class. We've already mentioned it a little bit, but we'll talk about it again in the last class, which is like synodic or solar phase cycles. Again, it's not exactly aspects, but it is the planets, the individual planets, their cyclic relationships to the sun. So it's a little, I just decided to group it here. I guess I could have made it a category of its own, but I'm including that here as well. So these are our four main components of a horoscope: planets, signs, houses, and aspects. So we'll build up the basic definitions of what all of these things are today, and then in the coming weeks, we'll look at them all in more detail. Like next class, we'll really zoom in on the signs. In our second to last class, we'll look in more detail about the houses and aspects. So stay tuned for more detail and more fleshing out of this stuff. But we will see them all today. And I really, this is something that's really struck me as I've been studying traditional astrology for the last couple of years, is how interconnected all these things are, and that you kind of need to have all of them to understand them all. That it really is a very holistic and coherent system, and all of these concepts really interrelate and are based on some very fundamental, both observational things, like what it's actually like to look at the sky at given moments, and how the planets appear, and how they move, as well as some very fundamental geometric relationships. All right, and then I don't want to spend too much time on this, but real brief here. I wanted to just bring up some philosophical concepts with astrology. So our two big, there's lots of other things that we can get into as well, but our two big philosophical concepts, or two big philosophical questions when we're talking about astrology, is first, how does astrology work? Assuming that we think that astrology does work, which again, everyone should be skeptical about and should test out and come to your own opinions about, to what extent it works, and how much it works and in what ways. But once we're at least have our foot in the door of thinking that astrology is a real functioning thing, then the question of how it works, naturally arises. And so in general, there's two main schools of thought here. The first is what's called astral causation, the idea that the planets or stars or signs are actually causes, that certain things happen in the sky, the planets move into a certain sign or are in a certain house, or planets form a certain aspect or relationship to each other, and that causes things to happen. And so this is what's known as astral causation. And so there's a few different ways that this can happen. This can happen physically. In the modern world, people often talk about, like light and gravity and things like that happening. And then even this goes way back, like Ptolemy, who was an important astrologer, who was philosophically, he was an Aristotelian. He thought about this happening physically as well, especially through the idea of like the temperament. Like he would say that, because Mars is hot and dry, that when Mars is prominent in the sky or prominent in a chart, it heats things up and dries them out. And that's why Mars ends up signifying things like, conflict or strife, is because when things are hot and dry, there will naturally be more conflict. So, he's not using, he's not talking about this physical causation in the same way that a modern person would, but he is thinking about it in terms of a very physical effect that the planets are causing. We can also have astral causation in less physical, more subtle ways, like the idea that the planets, through these motions or the kind of astral correlates of the planets have an effect on the subtler, layers of reality, and that's what affects things. So we can talk about, the same sort of astral causation, but instead of operating physically, operating through, an ethereal or astral or other kind of form of subtle causation. And then we can also talk about it in a more, I guess broadly what we call like an animistic sort of perspective, that, the different spirits, angels, or gods associated with these planets, that they have an influence and they cause things to happen, or, cause people to be the way that they are, and cause events to occur in alignment with the movements of the planets and stars. All right, so that's the kind of the first big philosophical position there is what's called astral causation. And then the second one would be a more sign or omen-based system. By signs here, I don't mean signs of the zodiac. I mean, like a sign, like an omen, a symbol, right? So rather than the planets or the motions of them causing things to happen, they instead of just foretell things, and so they're like, or portend them, right? That they indicate things that will happen, but not actually causing them. So this is a somewhat more like magical or divinatory understanding. That they are signs or omens, and then we can interpret them to understand what's going to happen, but they're not directly causing them to happen. And then a few other so again, those are the two big positions, and they're not mutually exclusive. You can absolutely think that both, or that all of these things are part of the story, and that maybe even like different parts of astrology work in slightly different ways. There's lots of different positions that we can come to here, and I think we can also hold these things lightly and maybe think that these are all like different perspectives on something that maybe we can't quite understand directly. All right, so also, we have the ideas of correspondences and chains of correspondences, so that different things here on Earth correspond to celestial things, and that so as the celestial motions and events happen, there are corresponding events here on Earth without it being like a direct sense of causation, but that everything in the cosmos, from the subtlest to the grossest levels, are all interconnected and all like mutually influence and reflect each other as well, right? We have like ideas about as above, so below, that the mundane and the physical is like a reflection of the celestial or the divine or the spiritual or whatever, right? All those ideas can be brought in here too. And again, we think of the ideas of cosmic synchronization, that it's that not that the planets like directly cause things or even are directly omens of things, but that celestial movements are how do we put this? That celestial things happen on the same basic like patterns and time periods as things happen here on Earth, so that we can look at a place where there's very clear cycles and motions to gain insight into places like our lives, where the different cycles and meanings and symbols are a little less clear. And so we're just looking at two systems that are synchronized, and then we can infer back and forth between them. All right, and then our second big philosophical idea that's worth thinking about is in terms of fate or free will. Whether we whether we're fated to undergo the things that are the charts like portend, or that transits foretell, or whether they're just tendencies, or whether they show options or things that might happen. So again, this is something that's worth thinking about: is to what extent are these things signifying fate, and to what extent are they merely talking about situations or conditions, and then we can choose how to react to those things, or can in different ways influence the way that particular astrological signatures will take place. And again, it's not just black and white or one or the other. It may be like kind of mixed cases. There may be cases where certain things are more fated and other cases where there's more free will. And Crowley's approach to this is something he actually talks about in book 4 in a section. He's not talking about astrology specifically, but just about the general, philosophical concept or question of free will versus determinism. He really wants to show it as a kind of false problem. Now his solution, I think there's actually kind of better versions of this, but I totally agree with the basic thrust of what he's trying to do here, is to show that both are true, and that the actual reality transcends this opposition between free will and determinism. And so his argument, at least in brief, says that although everything that will happen to you and everything that you will do is entirely determined, you yourself are not separate from the omnipotent God who willed that all those things should happen in that way. And so by seeing individuals and the divine power as not separate from each other, the idea that there's no external thing called fate, that you yourself are identified with the divine power that has willed that your fate should be the way that it is. Again, I think there's maybe more sophisticated philosophical arguments that could be made here, but I definitely follow Crowley's basic approach there of trying to see these types of philosophical problems as something like false problems to be transcended. But again, all of this is just stuff for you to reflect on and to think about. I'm not trying to suggest any definite answers to any of these questions. All right, so let's get into some of our basic concepts here. So this is a diagram you've seen before. I saw a couple of people typing there. Feel free to jump in with questions. Even if I've moved on to the next slide, I can go back if people have questions or comments or anything like that. Okay, so this is a diagram you've seen before. This is showing a modern cosmology and the plane of the solar system. So we've got the sun in the center, surrounded by the orbits of Mercury, Venus, and then Earth and Mars, the asteroid belt, and then Jupiter and Saturn. And that's really all the planets that we are concerned with here. But you can also see Uranus and Neptune out here. And then we're just not going to, Pluto is really weird and different, and so we're not going to worry about that. But just trying to illustrate here that the orbits of the planets are all more or less, they deviate a little bit, but more or less lie on this flat plane. With the sun at the center, and that happens just as the dust cloud that eventually forms our solar system is starting to collapse. The gravitational and rotational forces just flatten that into a flat plane, and so the planets lie on this flat plane. All right, so here I got the same diagram twice, just angled in different ways to try to illustrate what I want to show you here. So if you look on the left here. This blue ellipse here that you see, and you can see the circle here, that's the ecliptic. So the ecliptic is that plane of the solar system, the plane that from our perspective, with the Earth, we're looking from the Earth as the center, or from the perspective of the Earth. This is like the plane that all the planets, or the circle that all the planets appear to move around. And so because our pole, the north-south pole of the Earth, is not perfectly perpendicular to this plane, but is angled away from perpendicular at a little less than 23.5 degrees. Now on the right here, I've got it oriented so that our pole is vertical there, and now the plane of the solar system, or with the ecliptic, is angled to our equator at 23.5 degrees, approximately. So what's called the north celestial pole and the south celestial pole, that's just the pole of our planet, just projected out into space. And similarly, the celestial equator is the Earth's equator, just projected out into space. And then again, like I said, the ecliptic, or the plane of the solar system, is angled to our equator at 23.5 degrees. And from our perspective, again, there's a little bit of deviation, but all the planets, including the sun and moon, all move basically around this ecliptic. And we'll talk about that in a little more detail in a few minutes. But yeah, so again, just the idea that the planets are on this, the ecliptic is the track that all the planets run around and never deviate far from. And it's defined by the sun's motion over the course of a year, which we'll talk about in a minute. All right, so the ecliptic is divided into 12 equal sections. And this is what gives us the 12 signs of the zodiac. It's just a 12-fold division of the ecliptic. So each sign is 1/12 of the ecliptic. So a circle, of course, is 360 degrees. And so you just divide 360 by 12. And so each sign occupies 30 degrees. Now, the division into 12 here is most likely, this comes out of the Mesopotamian tradition, is most likely based on the fact that there are approximately 12 full moons per solar year. So we can think of the signs as like the place that the 12 full moons would happen. Because the lunar and solar cycles don't exactly align, every 3 years you get a 13th full moon. But for our purposes here, we're talking about 12 full moons per solar year. And that's the basic idea of the division of the ecliptic into 12 sections. The sections, of course, are named for the constellations that were located in the sections a couple thousand years ago. Though, of course, because of the precession of the equinoxes, which has to do with a slight wobble in the Earth's axis, those have now moved away. But from tropical astrology, which is what I practice and what I'm teaching here, we're using the we're continuing to use the names of those constellations. And again, from, like in the early Babylonian tradition, they had, I think it was 16 different constellations that were around the ecliptic. So it may very well be that this idea of there being 12 sections influenced the division of those stars into the 12 signs of the zodiac. And even like the Greeks, like Libra is actually part of the constellation Scorpio, and then is later divided out, like broken out to be its own constellation, probably on the idea of the 12-fold division. So we've got the 12 signs of the zodiac. So we have Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. And again, each one occupies 30 degrees of the ecliptic. All right, so again, as we talked about, the planets move along the ecliptic. And so we just want to be familiar with how that happens and what direction it happens, and some of the basic ideas about the speed that this happens in. So the planets move in their normal motion. They move counterclockwise around the ecliptic, and that's also why the signs are in counterclockwise order. You'll see a lot of, I've seen so many diagrams in like kind of wall hangings and stuff like that where the planets go, the signs go clockwise. I don't know why that's such a common mistake, but they are in a clockwise order, right? So from Aries to Taurus to Gemini, right, we're moving counterclockwise, and that's also the order that the planets move in their normal motion. So you can see I've got the sun here moving from mid-Taurus to Gemini to Cancer to Leo, and because the sun goes around all 12 signs, from our perspective, obviously, in a year, the sun changes signs every month. So the sun would be in mid-Taurus in was that like early May, and then would be in mid-Gemini by early June, and then to Cancer. So each step here is about a month of time. All right, and then I've also got the moon here. Now the moon moves much faster. It only takes her about 2.3 days to move through each sign. So the moon in Scorpio moves to Sagittarius in about 2.3 days, and then to Capricorn in another 2.3 days, and then to Aquarius. So what this journey here of moving through 3 signs took the sun 3 months. It only takes the moon about a week. And of course, then the other planets also have their own planetary periods as well, just using the sun and moon as basic illustrations there. And now occasionally, now the sun and moon never go retrograde, but the other 5 planets have their retrograde periods, which is the exception to the rule. Most of the time, they are moving counterclockwise around the ecliptic, but when they go retrograde, then they move clockwise for a period of time. All right, so returning back here, we saw that the ecliptic was divided into the 12 signs of 30 degrees each, but we need a way of anchoring these 12 signs to like astronomical facts so that we can know, and again, because they're all equal, we only need to anchor like a single point to the ecliptic to then be able to define precisely everything else. And so what we're going to use here is well, specifically the vernal equinox point, but also, we could think of this as being the 4 equinox and solstitial points. So I'm mostly going to use northern, because what in the northern hemisphere is the summer solstice, in the southern hemisphere is the winter solstice. The solstices are reversed in the hemispheres, and the equinoxes are reversed as well. So a week ago, we had the vernal equinox here in the northern hemisphere, but that was the autumnal equinox in the southern hemisphere. So again, I'm in the northern hemisphere. I think most of my audience is in the northern hemisphere here, so I'll just default to, and it's in the northern hemisphere that a lot of these concepts are developed and this tradition is developed. So I'll apologies to anyone listening from the southern hemisphere, but I will default to northern hemisphere terminology. But just everyone should be aware that the solstices and equinoxes are flipped or symmetrically flipped in this way between the hemispheres. So the equinox and solstitial points are defined as locations of the sun. So a week ago, when we had the vernal equinox, the sun was right here. And so again, the sun always moves around the ecliptic. And in fact, the sun's motion over the course of the year is what defines the ecliptic. And so the 2 equinoxes are the 2 places where the sun or where the ecliptic crosses the celestial equator. So when the sun is at those points, that's an equinox. So just a week ago, the sun was right here at the point, the vernal equinox point, which is one of the 2 places where the ecliptic crosses the celestial equator. And now, is moving. It would now move a little bit higher, a little bit further north here, in the last week. And so the equinox and solstice points divide the ecliptic into quarters. And then each quarter is further divided into 3 equal sections in giving individual signs, right? So 0 degrees Aries, that's the very beginning of Aries, that is defined as the vernal equinox point. And then the 30-degree arc following from that here, that's Aries. And then the middle of this arc, right, the middle of spring, that's Taurus. And then the end of this arc, the end of spring, that's Gemini. And then the summer solstice point, that's 0 degrees Cancer. And then this 30 degrees, that's Cancer, then 30 degrees of Leo, then 30 degrees of Virgo, the end of summer. And then the autumnal equinox, that's 0 degrees Libra. And then we have 30-degree arc for Libra, 30-degree arc Scorpio, and then finally the end of autumn here, that's the 30 degrees of Sagittarius. And then the winter solstice point here, that's 0 degrees Capricorn. Then we have 30-degree arc Capricorn, then Aquarius, and then finally this final arc here, that's Pisces. And then we're back to the vernal equinox and back to 0 degrees Aries. All right, so that's how we define the zodiac and how we determine, when a planet leaves one sign and enters the next. All right, so one thing that's very important about the number 12, and it's probably one of the big reasons why 12 is so important, both in astrology and in other, systems of numerical symbolism and all that, is that 12 has a greater number of factors than really any other number, any number smaller than it. Yeah, so it has, right, so 12, of course, is 1 times 12, but that's kind of trivial, right? Every number is itself multiplied by 1, obviously. And when we're talking about grouping the zodiac, the signs into different groups, we're not really that concerned with one group of all 12 of them. That's just the 12 signs, or 12 groups of one. That's just the individual signs. What we're concerned with here is the fact that 12 is both 2 times 6 and 3 times 4. So on the left here, I've got the signs. Now, for some purposes, as we'll actually see, sometimes we actually talk about Cancer being the beginning of the zodiac, and we'll talk about why that is. But for these purposes here, for assigning the meanings and the groupings of the signs of the zodiac, we're beginning our numbering with Aries, and then just going in order down to Pisces, which is 12. Right, so just signs in order, numbered 1 to 12. All right, so our first group here, this is what I'm calling polarity. This is like 2 groups of 6. And so the odd numbered signs are what's called are diurnal, meaning like of the day. And then the even numbered signs are nocturnal, meaning of the night. And this is coming out of Pythagorean symbolism. Actually, if anyone listened to the series that I did on the Sephiroth in the 2nd class in that series, I talked about some of this Pythagorean odd and even significations, and day and night are directly associated with odd and even in the Pythagorean system. So that's where this is coming from. Right, so we'll just alternate diurnal, nocturnal, just like we're obviously alternating odd and even. Right, and then our next grouping here is what's called quadruplicity, and this is 3 times 4, or 3 groups of 4 signs each. And so this relates back to the seasonal stuff that we were just looking at on the previous slides. So the sign that begins each season, those are the cardinal signs, and then the middle of the season is we'll call it fixed, also known as cherubic signs, and then the end of each season is the mutable sign. So again, beginning with Aries, right? Because Aries is the beginning of spring. So Aries is a cardinal sign. Taurus is the middle of spring. So Taurus is a fixed sign. Gemini is a mutable sign because it's the end of spring. And then we get to Cancer. Cancer is the beginning of summer. So that's a cardinal sign again. So we're just going down through the list. Cardinal, fixed, mutable, cardinal, fixed, mutable. And then that just goes, just loops all the way around in a constant alternation of cardinal, fixed, mutable, which is also the beginning, middle, and end of each of the 4 seasons. All right, and then we have what's called triplicity, which is 4 groups of 3. It's really easy to get, I used to always get mixed up about which one was the quadruplicities and which one was the triplicities. Just remember, it's how many things are in the group that's naming it rather than how many groups there are, right? So the quadruplicities are 3 groups of 4. There's 4 in each group, so that's quadruplicity, and the triplicities are the groups of 3. All right, and so now we're basically gonna do the same thing, just go through a sequence now of 4 things, all the way down just from fire, earth, air, water, fire, earth, air, water, fire, earth, air, water, through the 12 signs. Now, why exactly the elements are in this order? This is probably not like a real foundational concept. The groupings of the signs into these triplicities, into the 4 groups of 3, that happens first, and then it's a little bit later, like a couple hundred years into the tradition, that those groupings get assigned to the elements. So we don't have quite the same logic of why it's in this order. It's more like they're grouped then. They're grouped into those groups. And then the groups are assigned to the elements based on the planets ruling those signs and some other considerations. One thing we do note, though, is that all of the diurnal signs are either fire or air, and the nocturnal signs are either earth or water. So that's an important thing to be aware of. And then finally, conceptually, we should have another thing here of 6 groups of 2. Just dividing them into groups of 2 is a little less useful, though we do see the logic of 6 groups of 2 in the idea of what I'm kind of calling the logic of opposition, which is signs that are directly opposite to each other, and houses that are directly opposite to each other have this as well, will be defined as being opposite and will signify, there'll be a kind of logic of polarity here between any opposite signs. And so that helps to define the meaning of a lot of these things is based on a contrast with their opposite. And we'll build up the actual meanings and significations of these things in just a few minutes. Yeah. All right, so I just want to show you around the zodiac what these groupings look like, and the geometric forms that they produce. So here, the white hexagon, and it's significant that these are hexagons we're looking at here, as we'll see in a few minutes. The white hexagon touches all the diurnal signs, right? So we have the diurnal signs: Aries, Gemini, Leo, Libra, Sagittarius, Aquarius, and then back to Aries again. Those are the diurnal signs, and then the black hexagon touches the 6 nocturnal signs, right? From Taurus, Cancer, Virgo, Scorpio, Capricorn, Pisces. Those are the 6 nocturnal signs. And again, the diurnal and nocturnal, they're joined by a hexagon. All right, and then I was lazy and didn't interweave these figures here like I did on the last one. Now we have the division, the quadruplicity, the division into cardinal, fixed, and mutable. So the red square touches the 4 cardinal signs. And again, remember that these are the beginnings of the seasons, right? So we're Aries, the beginning of spring; Cancer, the beginning of summer; Libra, the beginning of autumn; and Capricorn, the beginning of winter. And then the black square touches the 4 fixed signs, which are the middle of the seasons, right? Taurus, middle of spring; Leo, middle of summer; Scorpio, middle of autumn; and Aquarius, the middle of winter. And then the gray square I've got there touches the 4 mutable signs, which are the end of the seasons. And again, it's significant that the shapes drawn by connecting the cardinal, fixed, and mutable signs is a square. Let's see, we got a comment here from Kristen. She says, notice that remembering the quadruplicities helps with remembering tarot associations: 2, 3, 4 cardinal, 5, 6. Right, the attributions of the small cards to the decans. Yeah, definitely. All right. And then now we have the 4 elements, or the triplicities. And again, it's significant that the elemental signs, the signs of the same element, are linked together to form triangles. So there we see the red triangle links the 3 fire signs of Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. The black triangle links the 3 earth signs: Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. Yellow triangle links the 3 air signs: Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. And then the blue triangle links the 3 water signs of Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. And also just illustrating the geometry here, and this geometric way of thinking, and also the kind of mandala-like quality that I think these things have. I think that's nice to see. Yeah. All right. So now we can look at, from the point of view of each one of the signs, right? We now have the polarity, quadruplicity, and triplicity assigned to each of the signs. So you're seeing the same information, both as a table there, and then on the wheel of the zodiac. So we can see, polarity is just alternating diurnal, nocturnal, diurnal, nocturnal. Quadruplicity is just going cardinal, fixed, mutable, cardinal, fixed, mutable. And then we're just going fire, earth, air, water, fire, earth, air, water. And so again, as we saw, all the diurnal signs are either fire or air, or from the other perspective, all the fire and air signs are diurnal, and all the earth and water signs are nocturnal. But each element, or each sign, is a unique combination of quadruplicity and triplicity, right? So Aries is the only cardinal fire sign, Taurus is the only fixed earth sign, Gemini is the only mutable air sign, and so we have, of the 4 cardinal signs, 1 of each is assigned to each of the elements, and of the 3 fire signs, 1's cardinal, 1's fixed, and 1's mutable. So each is like a unique combination of quadruplicity and triplicity. And then there you see that just arranged around the zodiac. We've got the elemental glyphs, and then just C for cardinal, F for fixed, and M for mutable. And again, so it's like a permutation, right? We're taking these the groups of 2, 3, and 4, and just permuting them over a group of 12. And that functions to make it perfectly continuous, because 12 is a multiple of 2, 3, 4, and 6. All right, so coming back, back again to our factors of 12 here, and now we're going to build up some of the basic meanings of each one of these things. And then in 2 weeks, we'll really dive into each one of the signs individually after we've built up a few more things for the rest of this class here. All right, so again, we have this idea of polarity, which is diurnal. I'm calling diurnal and nocturnal. You should be aware that this is often, especially in traditional texts, is discussed as gender. And so diurnal corresponds to the masculine and nocturnal to feminine. I think that it's perfectly fine to just drop the gender language and just use diurnal and nocturnal rather than feminine and masculine. Yeah, but you should just be aware that you'll see that, especially if you start looking at like traditional astrological texts. They'll talk about, the masculine signs and the feminine signs. So you should just be aware of what that means. But I'm not going to use that gender language. I think there's just you just don't lose anything at all. And actually, some of the symbolism is actually clearer, I think, if you don't use it and just use diurnal and nocturnal instead. All right, so again, these are just the significations here. These are just some suggestions that I'm coming up with. You could certainly come up with your own. And there's lots of other nice keywords. I was just limited by the size of the slide here. There's lots of other nice keywords that you could come up with as well. These are just some basic suggestions to get you started thinking about these things. So in general, we can talk about the diurnal signs as being active, intense, projecting, engaging, hot, and direct, and the nocturnal signs as receptive, calm, observing, withdrawing, cool, and curving. This like direct versus curving. Curving is the idea of like kind of the diurnal signs being like linear, directly going at something, just sort of pursuing something in a straight line, or moving in a kind of linear or very direct fashion. And then the nocturnal signs being somehow indirect or sort of spiraling or coming in kind of sideways or making a circular or looping sort of motion, which is interesting. This is something, again, you get this right out of the Pythagorean symbolism. The odd numbers were seen to be kind of linear and straight, and the even numbers were like crooked or curved. And you even see this idea in like Chinese, like in Taoist philosophy, the yang is like straight and linear, kind of radiating motion, where the yin is more like spiral or a circular kind of motion, which is just a nice agreement there between some Eastern and Western symbol sets. And there we see the 6 diurnal signs and 6 nocturnal signs, which again were the signs joined by those black and white hexagons. All right, then we have the quadruplicity. And again, I think hopefully it's just really clear, especially from what we've said previously in the series, of why the diurnal means those things, why those qualities are associated with the day, and the nocturnal qualities are associated with the night. I hope that's just fairly intuitive. All right, and then we've got the quadruplicity of cardinal, fixed, and mutable. And again, these significations are all coming from the ideas that the cardinal is the beginning of the season, fixed is the middle of the season, and then mutable is the end of the season. So the 4 cardinal signs that begin the seasons, they have significations of beginning or establishing or moving or pursuing an agenda. We can think of the cardinal signs or planets that are in cardinal signs as having something that they want to accomplish. They're showing up with a goal in mind, something that they want to pursue, something that they want to create, something that they want to initiate. All right, and then the 4 fixed signs that correspond with the middle of the seasons, they have significations of continuing, preserving, holding, enduring, and stabilizing. And so again, this is like the middle of the seasons, so nothing's really changing, you're just continuing, and they themselves are, these 4 signs of Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius are often used as symbols of the elements themselves because they represent the elements in their most like pure and stable forms, right? They're not either just beginning or in the process of transitioning into something else. We're not going to talk about that, but that's just something to be aware of, the way that the 4 cherubic or fixed signs have a special relationship to the elements. All right, and then the 4 mutable signs are the ends of the seasons and have significations like ending, changing, adapting, transforming, and understanding. And I think we can come at that idea of like understanding as like looking back as something is ending. We can like look back over it. I always think of Hegel has that famous line that the owl of Minerva takes flight at dusk, by which he's meaning that like philosophy can only understand things after they happen. Philosophy is always sort of retroactively looking back to understand what occurred, and isn't really able to look ahead. Though, of course, Marx disagrees with him, right? But that's a whole other story. But again, I just have that idea of understanding there as sort of looking back as things are finishing or completing or getting ready to move into the next stage. Then we can retroactively understand things. And we'll see that in the significations of those signs. Let's see. So Kristen's saying, would today be a really good day to do a ritual if someone is beginning something because the sun is in Aries and the moon is in Libra? Yeah, I mean, that's possible. There's some other things that often signify beginnings, like you can use lunar phase to signify beginnings as well. So, you can sometimes begin things at the new moon as well. There's a lot of different considerations to use. But yeah, I mean, that's certainly part of the thinking that you could use for timing rituals, certainly. And there's not necessarily one like right or wrong, answer about that. But yeah, I mean, beginning something, if you want to like initiate something, putting planets into cardinal signs might be a really nice way of doing that. And sometimes if you want things like to be really long lasting, you'll put things into fixed signs, like electing a time for a marriage or something like that. You might prefer like Venus in Taurus. It's one of the signs that she rules, so she's dignified there, and that's a fixed sign rather than Venus in Libra. So the fixed signs have those ideas of stability and endurance and something that lasts a long time. So you might put Venus in Taurus in electing a marriage to try to get it to last and to endure. But yeah, I mean, that's certainly the type of logic that is employed, certainly. All right, and then triplicity. This is basically elemental symbolism, though I think we can really contrast the elemental symbolism in terms of astrological triplicity with some of the more Kabbalistic elemental symbolism, where, especially like with the lower four Sephiroth, we're really looking at like divisions of like a human person. I think like where earth can really symbolize like the physical body, and then fire would be like the spirit, but we want to be careful about that with triplicity. This is more about like temperament. It's not that the fire signs aren't like better than the earth signs or anything like that. It's more like four modes that are all equal. So I just think that it's important to, when we're talking about elemental symbolism, to define what context we're talking about here, and just that when we're talking about the zodiac and astrology in general, the four signs are equal, right? It's not that like fire people are more spiritual than earth people or something like that, but when they are spiritual, there would be a tendency to be spiritual in a different sort of way. One would be spiritual in a fiery sort of way, and then there would be spiritual in like an earthy sort of way. Yeah. But certainly like earth people aren't like stupid or anything like that. You know what I mean? So we should just be careful about that. All right, so the three fire signs have significations like power, they're powerful, expressive, visionary. They tend to be goal oriented, can signify leadership. Yeah, sometimes concerned with the self. There can be a kind of in a more unhealthy expression, like a kind of egocentricity, but also, that idea of like expressing an inner vision or like an inner conviction. That's all related to fire signs. Earth signs tend to be concrete, stable, perceptive, oriented towards the senses and towards the perception of concrete, actual things. Realistic and oriented with the form and structure of things. Then the air signs tend to be dynamic, mobile, can often relate to thinking or to language and to the verbal, but can also be scattered or a bit flighty. And then the water signs tend to be kind of formless, right? I mean, water is formless. It adapts to the shape of its container rather than earth, which has a form of its own. So yeah, formless, but also fertile, right? Water, of course, is one of the key elements in life, and soil needs to have water to be fertile. So we can think of the water signs as all like fertile and productive. Yeah, it can signify substance. It can also be internal or depth or feeling. Can all be watery significations. I don't love I think emotions is sometimes not a great category, but in general, we could probably put emotions, onto water. Though again, I think there are fiery emotions and airy emotions and all that sort of stuff. But the idea of like feeling and where air might be a little more like intellectual and oriented toward the rational or the logical. Water might be more intuitive and oriented towards feeling. All right, and then the last thing here, again, just sort of filling out that missing category of like 6 groups of 2. And this is really just an example. There's lots of other like pairs of keywords that I could have given you, but I didn't want to spend too much time with it. And just to give you a little bit of indication of the way that the signs can mean these sort of opposite things and are defined in part by contrast with the opposite sign. So we have the opposite signs of Aries and Libra, Taurus and Scorpio. These are the signs that are opposite to each other in the zodiac. So, where Aries is assertion, Libra is balance. Where Taurus is stability, Scorpio is volatility. Where Gemini is multiplicity, Sagittarius is synthesis. And if you're familiar with the tarot, you can really see that in the tarot cards attributed to Gemini and Sagittarius. Cancer is like intimate or central and personal, whereas Capricorn tends to be more objective. Leo is like center, Aquarius is circumference. Virgo focuses on difference, and then Pisces is interested in unity. And again, those are just examples. There's lots of other contraries that we could generate as well, but just to give you some sense of how that works. Excuse me. Yeah, so let's just move on here. All right, so again, we'll come back to the zodiac today as well as in 2 weeks from now. But now we're just going to shift gears a little bit and define some of the basic meanings of the houses. So where before we were talking about the planets' motion through the signs, we're now going to talk about the motion of the signs as well as the planets inside of them over the course of a single day. So where the planets move counterclockwise through the signs, the entire wheel, the signs as well as the planets in them, moves clockwise in the course of a single day. Well, when you get really far north and south, things get weird, but we'll just ignore that for our purposes. Like once you start getting close to like the Arctic or Antarctic circles, things get strange. But yeah, we're just not going to worry about that. All right, so yeah, great. So the wheel itself has a clockwise motion. It's backwards, I guess from your perspective, it should be that way, right? Yeah, so the wheel itself has a clockwise diurnal motion, like over the course of a single day. Right, and it's also at any given time, exactly half of the ecliptic is above the horizon and half is below. So we can see there the part that I've shaded in gray, that's like the part below the horizon, and then white is the part of the ecliptic that's above the horizon. So a planet that's in a sign above the horizon, that planet would be, if it's nighttime, it would be visible, and we can tell whether it's day or night by whether the sun is above or below the horizon. So we see the sun is in Leo here, and it's below the horizon, so this chart would be for nighttime. And we can tell that it's just a couple hours before dawn because the sun the rising sign changes approximately every 2 hours, not exactly because of the angles of the planes. Some of the signs rise faster than others, but on average, it's about every 2 hours it takes for one sign to rise up over the horizon. Right, so we have the eastern horizon over here, and then the western horizon over there. This is the places where the ecliptic crosses the eastern horizon. That's the rising, and then the western horizon. That's where the ecliptic is setting. So the sun would be just a little below the horizon here and in the process of rising up. So this would just be a couple hours before dawn. Now, I've just given just 3 of the planets as examples here. So Jupiter is in Gemini and would have just risen up over the horizon about 2 hours ago. And then we've got Saturn over here in Aquarius, and Saturn would be towards the western part of the sky and would be about to set within about 2 hours. And we can see that because Saturn is opposite to the sun here in this diagram that I've made up, just as the sun is rising, Saturn would be setting. So it's important to get just a little bit of an intuitive sense of how, the actual astronomy gets extremely complex, but just getting a basic sense of how things move over the course of the day is important for understanding a lot of our symbolism here. All right, and now dropping off the planets and signs here, we're just going to divide the sky into 12 sections. So there's different ways of doing this. There's different systems of house division. The system that I think is the simplest to learn it's probably the oldest, and some of the, as we'll see in like a month from now, some of the logic behind what the signs mean is really based on this, what we're going to call whole sign. So what's going to happen here is that each sign is going to be the boundaries of the houses are going to line up with the boundaries of the signs. So whichever sign is on the ascendant is often abbreviated as ASC or sometimes just AC or sometimes just AS. That's the ascendant, right? That's the eastern horizon. So whatever sign is intersecting with the eastern horizon, that's the sign that's rising up over the eastern horizon at the current moment. And so in the whole sign houses, that entire sign of the zodiac is the first house. So if Cancer is rising, Cancer is the first house, and then Leo would be the second house, Virgo would be the third house, and so on. And so we can see that, right, so whatever sign is rising, whatever sign that the ascendant is located in, that's the first house, and the other houses are just numbered counterclockwise from there. So, the 12th house is always just a little above the horizon. The 10th house is always like the middle, the highest point of the ecliptic at any given moment is within the 10th house. The part of the ecliptic that's setting over the western horizon, that's the 7th house. And then the 4th house will be like the lowest point of the ecliptic below the horizon at any given time. And so again, these are divisions of the sky, right? These are divisions of the sky. This is anchored to the sky in a particular place at a particular time. And they also signify areas of life. Now we're not gonna really worry about the meanings of the individual houses today, but the one you should be aware of is just the first house, which is also called the ascendant or the rising sign or ascendant sign. That represents, in a birth chart, that represents you yourself. And then houses 2 through 12 indicate different aspects of your life, but it's just important to know that the first house indicates the person themselves, or in other types of charts, whatever the thing is in question is indicated by the rising sign. We will talk about some of the kind of symbolic reasons for that later on, but that's what's important to know for now. All right, so just a couple of examples here. So this would be so about 5 degrees of Gemini rising, right? So the ascendant here is intersecting Gemini at about 5 degrees into the sign. So Gemini is rising here, or in Gemini is the first house. Now Jupiter is in Gemini. It's a little below the horizon right here, but Jupiter would be in the first house in Gemini. We have Saturn here up towards above the horizon and towards the higher part of the sky here. And Saturn is in Aquarius in the 9th house. And then we have the Sun in Leo in the 3rd house, and that's underground. And so we know that this is nighttime because the Sun is below the horizon. All right, another example here. Now we've got 15 Cancer, right? So the ascendant is right in the middle of Cancer. So Cancer is the first house, and so we'd say Cancer rising. I've left the planets in the same signs, and you can see that now the Sun is in the 2nd house, right? Because this is a little bit later in the day. Gemini had been rising. Now Cancer is rising, so it's a couple hours later. And so the Sun is getting closer to rising up over the horizon. Jupiter's now risen and is here in the 12th house. And then Saturn is starting to set. It had been in the 9th and now is getting lower in the sky and more western and is now in the 8th house. All right, and then one final example. This is like 23 degrees of Scorpio rising. And so again, with whole sign houses, all of Scorpio is still the first house. And so you can see that depending on where in the sign the ascendant is located, part of the first house is always going to be above the horizon and part below. And that's symbolically significant, as we'll talk about later. And more or less of it can be above or below the horizon, depending on whether the ascendant is like early in the sign or late in the sign. So so this is late in Scorpio rising, but still all of Scorpio is the first house, all of Sagittarius is the 2nd house, and so on. And now we can see this is much later in the day. The Sun is now risen up and is in the 10th house. So this is around the middle of the day. Jupiter here is now getting close to setting, although Jupiter wouldn't be visible because it's daytime and the Sun is so bright that we can't see Jupiter. And Saturn is now well underground. And again, even if it wasn't daytime, Saturn still wouldn't be visible because it's below the horizon here. But all the planets are staying in the same sign, so we're just illustrating the diurnal motion of the planets here. All right, so this is about 20 minutes ago, I guess. I, as always, underestimated how much time it would take to talk here, but I was trying to guess what would be like here and now in Sacramento. So this is actually 20 minutes ago. But 20 minutes ago, Leo was rising. The ascendant was right at the beginning of Leo. So Leo is still rising. The ascendant is now just a little bit later into Leo, but Leo would still be rising. We can see that it's just afternoon here, and so the ascendant is in the sun is in Aries here, up high in the sky, and it's just past the middle of the day. And Venus is also there as well, just past her conjunction with the sun. We'll talk about the MC, that's the midheaven. We'll talk about what that is later on. Don't worry about it for now. Mars is also above the horizon here with the North Node in Gemini. Mercury is in Pisces here. Jupiter and Saturn are just about to set, but again, it's daytime, so they're not visible anyways. And the moon is underground here in Libra. And so again, right, so this wheel is just constantly rotating. And so in the 20 minutes since this chart was set for, everything has rotated a little bit further clockwise. All right, now let's talk a little bit about aspects. So again, we're talking about, this is part of the whole sign logic here, and so we can talk about whole sign aspects, which is the aspects that like everything in a sign makes to everything in other signs. So here we're just looking at from the perspective of the ascendant, right? That would be on the left here. And so whatever sign it is that is the ascendant, and the aspects that basically the ascendant makes to or the first house or whatever sign that is the first house makes to the other signs, and any planet in the first house makes to the other planets. Though this geometric relationship, you can just rotate this around to any point in the chart. The relationships hold. I'm just giving you one, from the perspective of one particular place in the chart. But there's nothing particularly special about that location. So what we've got here now is so the aspects are formed from this basic like geometric logic. And so what's going to happen here is that each planets in each sign form aspects to not every other sign, but planets in certain other signs. So in the chart there on the right, you see the degree relationship of approximately 0 degrees. And so that is the planets in the same sign are said to be co-present with each other. And if they're also close by degree, then they're said to be conjunct. And then there you can see the glyph or the symbol that's used to indicate conjunction. And so that's planets that share the same sign, are co-present with each other. Now, if we divide the zodiac up into 6, right? And so this is like the hexagon relationship, or what we'll call the sextile. This is like signs that are 60 degrees from each other are said to be sextile to each other, and that divides the 360, by 6. Then if we look at the 90-degree relationship between the signs, this is dividing 360 by 4, right? And so this is the square relationship, just like we were seeing previously. In those like geometric diagrams I was showing you for the signs. And then 360 divided by 120, that's 3, right? So that's the trine or triangle relationship, and its glyph is just a triangle. And then finally, we have the 180-degree relationship, which divides 360 by 2, and that's what we call the opposition, or classically was called the diameter. Right, so we can see that like this sign here is sextile to this sign, square to this sign, trine to this sign, opposite this sign, trine, square, and sextile again. Now you'll notice that there's no division of 360 by 5, right? Because that would be 360 divided by 5 is 72, and that's not like a whole sign. The degree relationships are always in this logic, in the classical logic here. The degree relationships are always multiples of 30 and are whole sign relationships. We also notice that there's no 150-degree relationship, because 150 does not divide 360 into a whole number. So we have degree relationships are always multiples of 30, and it has to divide 360 into a whole number. And this is the same like geometric shapes that we saw earlier. The division into 6, the hexagon or sextile. Division into 4 is the square. Division into 3 is the trine or triangle. And the division into 2 is that the opposition or the diameter. And so the basic idea here is that planets that planets see, interact with, and relate to planets that they share a whole sign aspect to. And then we can look at degree-based aspects, how the exact like degree relationship between the planets to add like precision and detail. The closer they are by degree, the stronger that aspect, the stronger that relationship is. But the aspect itself is just defined by the relationship between the whole signs. I know it's a little bit confusing, but yeah, so here's a little, another diagram here. Now I wrote it, now we're looking at, and I just put a Mercury in as an example planet there. And now we're looking at it from the perspective of the top of the chart, just to show you that this relationship holds from any place in the chart. All right, so Mercury, is in whatever sign that is. If there's any other planets in that sign also, Mercury would be conjunct or co-present with that planet. Now, any planet that's in the signs immediately adjacent to whatever sign Mercury is in, there's no whole sign relationship. And so there's no, Mercury essentially doesn't see and doesn't form a relationship to those planets. Now the signs here and here, Mercury would then form a sextile to those planets. And so another way of thinking about this, besides the geometric thing, is about what the planets share. So obviously the planets are in the same sign. They share all of their qualities to get, quadruplicity, triplicity, polarity. They share all of those things if they're in the same sign, obviously. But a planet that's sextile to another planet, they will share polarity with each other. So if one is in a, if Mercury, let's say Mercury is in, I don't know, let's say Mercury is in Aries here, right, which is a diurnal sign. We know that this will also be a diurnal sign. This will be Gemini. And then this will also be a diurnal sign. This will be Aquarius. So Mercury is sextile to anything in Gemini or in Aquarius, and because they share that polarity. And so they have something in common, and so they can have a relationship. Now, anything that's square will share quadruplicity. So again, in our example, if Mercury is in Aries here, this sign here and this sign here, they will also be cardinal signs because Aries is a cardinal sign, right? So this would be Cancer, and this would be Capricorn, also cardinal signs, but they're not sharing, they don't share an element, they don't share triplicity, and they're also of different polarity, but they share their quadruplicity, they're both cardinal. Now again, if Mercury is in Aries here, this sign here would be Leo, and this sign would be Sagittarius. So if Mercury is in Aries, any sign in Leo or any planet in Leo or in Sagittarius, they share the same element. They're all in fire signs, and so they share the trine relationship. So they share both triplicity and also polarity, though the fact that they share the same triplicity or element is the significant thing there. So any planets that, unless they're in the same sign, two planets in the same signs of the same element have a trine to each other. And then directly opposite will be a sign of both the same quadruplicity and the same polarity. So if Mercury was in Aries, this would be Libra, and so Mercury would be opposite any planet in Libra. And then again, the idea that non-aspecting planets, so any planet in, again, if this is Aries, this would be Taurus here, and this would be Pisces. And Aries has nothing in common with Taurus or Pisces, and so there's no relationship between a planet in Aries and a planet in Taurus or Pisces, or also Virgo or Scorpio. There's just no relationship because they don't share anything in common. All right, so here's just a quick aspect example. I'll just, won't go through all the aspects here, but just to show you some of the logic of whole sign aspects, we don't need to know what degree the planets are at to know their whole sign aspects. So yeah, let's just do a couple here. So from we'll start with the moon. So the moon is in Capricorn here. So the moon is and Mercury is in Cancer. So the moon is opposite to Mercury. No matter what the degree relationship, they're in opposite signs, so they're opposite to each other. Now the moon would not make any aspect at all to Saturn, which the moon is probably happy about, because they're in adjacent signs, and Capricorn and Aquarius don't share any of their qualities in common. Now Capricorn is an earth sign, and we see that Venus and Mars are both in Virgo, which is an earth sign, so the moon is making a trine to Venus and Mars. Let's see, I'll just give you one other example of each sign here. Let's say, okay, so from the point of view of this is Jupiter here. Jupiter would be making a trine to Saturn and Aquarius, right? Because they're both air, Gemini and Aquarius are both air signs, so they have a trine relationship. Jupiter would have no relationship to Mercury. It's just one sign adjacent, and Gemini and Cancer don't share any of their qualities in common, so there's no relationship between Jupiter and Mercury. Jupiter would be sextile to the Sun. They share polarity, right? Gemini is a diurnal sign, and Leo is a diurnal sign, so Jupiter is sextile to the Sun, and then Jupiter would be square to both Venus and Mars, because Gemini is a mutable sign and Virgo is a mutable sign, so they have that square relationship. And Venus and Mars would be co-present, or if they're very close by degree, we would say that they're conjunct, but we know that they're at least co-present because they're both in Virgo. And then, yeah, there's a few more aspects there, and you could go and take a look and work out what the other aspects are there as well. But that's just one example of each. All right, so this is something we'll come back to, but I just wanted to show you real briefly this idea of what I got this phrase from the scholar and astrologer Ben Dykes, calling these three things here Hermetic Mandalas. So these are three special diagrams from ancient astrology that build up some of our really basic concepts here. And so, yeah, we'll talk briefly about the Thema Mundi and the exaltations today, and then we'll come back to the planetary joys in our 6th class. But yeah, these three, I'm going to give you just some very basic information about these three diagrams, but there's so much more, and there's all kinds of interrelationships between them and so much depth that it's really something to meditate on. And I really like this phrase that Dykes used about calling them like Hermetic Mandalas. I thought that was a really nice, like evocative sort of phrase, and you can get some of the, you know, the sacred and esoteric like character of these things. And they're also really foundational for the meanings of a lot of the concepts of astrology. All right, so real brief here. This is the Thema Mundi, which is the mythical like nativity of the cosmos, or the birth chart of the cosmos, or even occasionally called the birth chart of God. Now, this was always understood metaphorically. Most of the early astrologers coming out of like Greek philosophy would have believed that the cosmos was infinite in time, that it had always existed and always will exist, so that there's no like definite moment of its birth. But mythologically, this is like the arrangement of the planets at the birth of the cosmos. So the moon is in Cancer, and Cancer is rising here, right? So the moon in Cancer is rising up over the ascendant, and this is because the Egyptian New Year was defined as when the star Sirius made its heliacal rising, and Sirius is approximately in the middle of Cancer, and the sun has now moved far enough away from Cancer into Leo that Sirius would be visible just before dawn. So you have that star rising up over the eastern horizon, and the moon is there as well. And the significance of Sirius making her heliacal rising is that just after the heliacal rising of Sirius is when the Nile flood would take place, which is, you know, the sort of the big natural event for Egypt, right? I mean, their entire civilization relied on the Nile flood to be able to have enough food to feed everyone. And so that's the beginning of the Egyptian New Year, which is probably why the Thema Mundi begins with Cancer rising. And the moon is there as well, right? The moon can signify birth. So putting the moon in the ascendant is like the birth of the cosmos. Yeah, and then we see the sun in Leo, Mercury is in Virgo, Venus is in Libra, Mars is in Scorpio, Jupiter is in Sagittarius, and Saturn is in Capricorn. So each of those planets will then have a special relationship to each one of those signs, and that'll become one of the signs that each of those planets rules. And again, there's lots of other interesting things going on here that we just don't have time to get into. But we need to also define how the other signs gain rulers as well. And so essentially, the sun and moon only rule one sign each, and then the other planets just get reflected symmetrically. So we have the sun ruling Cancer, or sorry, the moon ruling Cancer and the sun ruling Leo, and then the next planet out is Mercury, and so we'll just do that on the other side as well. So on each side of the luminaries, we have signs ruled by Mercury, and then on each side of that, we have Venus, and this is just going in Chaldean order. We're going from after the luminaries, we're then just going out in the order of the planetary speeds. So Mercury is the fastest, you know, after the moon. Then Venus is the fastest after that, so she'll rule the two signs past the two signs that Mercury rules, and that's Libra and Taurus. And then beyond that, we have the two signs that Mars rules, Scorpio and Aries. And then beyond that, the two signs that Jupiter rules, Sagittarius and Pisces. And then at the very end, the furthest from the luminaries and signifying the darkest parts of the year, we have the two signs that Saturn rules of Capricorn and Aquarius. So the planets will rule each one of these signs that they're pictured here within, and this will really help to define the meanings of the signs, because these signs belong to these planets. These are like the domiciles or dwelling places of the planets, and each planet has a control over and is responsible for what happens within the signs that they rule. And so just some terminological things here. The diurnal signs ruled by a planet are said to be the day houses. So, Libra Libra and Taurus are both ruled by Venus. And so Libra is said to be the day house or day like domicile of Venus. And then Taurus is the night house or night domicile of Venus. Now again, the sun and moon only rule one sign each. So the sun essentially only has a day house, right? Which makes sense because the sun is like identified with the day, and the moon only has a night house of Cancer because the moon is like identified with the night. But the other 5 planets each have one diurnal sign and one nocturnal sign. So they each have a day house and a night house. So if planets in a chart are found within their own domicile, right, like if Venus is found in Libra or in Taurus in a given chart, she only relies on herself. A planet, in some sense, has to rely on the ruler of that sign in order to be able to accomplish what that planet wants to accomplish. So if a planet is in its own domicile, it doesn't have to rely on any of the other planets, and they're in their own domicile, so they have all their own resources and their own stuff, and they're well equipped to accomplish their ends. And so that's taken as a strong indication. If a planet is in their own domicile, they're strong and able to accomplish their ends. Now, a little bit of this logic of opposition. If a planet is in the sign opposite to its domicile, because that sign will be kind of opposite in its significations to the sign of the domicile, that's thought to be a particularly difficult place for the planet. Now, it's not necessarily that the planet is bad or anything like that, but just that the planet will have some kind of adversity, and that the planet will struggle, and it can sometimes indicate, like struggle or difficulty in a particular area of the life if a planet is in the sign opposite to one of the signs that it rules. Right, so the moon would be in detriment in Capricorn because Capricorn is opposite to Cancer. Mercury would be in detriment in Pisces or in Sagittarius because Pisces is opposite to Virgo and Sagittarius is opposite to Gemini. And so those have kind of opposite meanings from the two houses, or the two signs, that Mercury rules. And so that's thought to be particularly difficult places for Mercury to be found. And so on for the other planets as well. And I'll show you a chart summarizing all that in just a moment. Let's see, almost done here. We just go a few minutes over, but not too bad as we sometimes are. All right, and now from this arrangement of the planets in the signs that they rule, we can also derive the nature of the aspects. Now, there's a lot going on here, and this is kind of a complex chart, so this is something that you might want to come back to in the slides and take a closer look at. But we notice that in this arrangement here, from each of the luminaries going out to each side, the planets form certain relationships. So Venus in Libra here is sextile to the sun, just like Venus in Taurus here is sextile to the moon. And so Venus will become identified with the sextile relationship. And then now Mars in Scorpio is square to Leo, and Mars in Aries is square to the moon in Cancer. So Mars will be identified with the square relationship. Then Jupiter in Sagittarius is trine to Leo, and Jupiter in Pisces is trine to Cancer. So Jupiter gets identified, or the trine relationship gets identified with Jupiter. And then the two signs ruled by Saturn are opposite to the two luminaries. And so Saturn will be identified with the opposition aspect. And so this colors them, right? So the sextile kind of has the nature of Venus, and Venus is the lesser benefic. So the sextile is friendly, but not as strong as the others. The sextile is definitely the weakest or the least significant of the aspects. Then the square is identified with Mars, and because Mars can signify strife and opposition and conflict, the square takes on some of that nature. The trine is identified with Jupiter, who is the greater benefic, and so the trine is friendly and helpful and cooperative, and is stronger than the sextile because Jupiter is the greater benefic, where Venus was the lesser benefic. And the opposition is identified, or kind of takes on some of the nature of Saturn, in the sense that Saturn is the greater malefic, and so oppositions also tend to be difficult and are stronger. However, compared in traditional astrology, which aspect it is, in a lot of ways, matters less than which planet it is forming the relationships. So, aspects between like Venus and Jupiter will always tend to be friendly. They're both benefics. They tend to get along with each other. So, the trine will be like the best and friendliest version of that, and then the square or opposition would be more difficult versions of that. But even a square or an opposition with one of the benefics will generally still be helpful, because the basic nature of the aspect is determined by the basic or inherent relationship between the planets. And if we have time later on, we can try to go through some of the combinations of the different planets and talk about what their basic inherent relationship is to each other. And it's also just something to pay attention to as you're studying astrology, just getting a sense of how each one of the planets feels about the other planets, and whether or not they like being in close relationship to them. Like the moon is always going to like being closely configured to Jupiter, and always dislike generally being closely configured to Saturn. So, like the square opposition between the moon and Jupiter, that'll be the most difficult version. And there could be some, kind of push and pull, or a little bit of conflict between lunar things and Jupiterian things, but generally will be friendly. And then with Saturn, the moon is generally not thrilled to be in relationship with Saturn. And so the trine will be like the nicest version of that, and the moon will get the most benefit from Saturn. Discipline and some of that like objectivity that Saturn can convey, whereas the squared opposition will be the most difficult version of that. But any moon Saturn opposition will always be somewhat difficult. So the aspects shade the nature of the relationship, but the basic nature of the relationship is determined by the planets that actually make that relationship to each other. All right, and then real quick here, maybe we'll actually come back to this a little bit more in 2 weeks, the exaltations here. Each planet is also said to be exalted. Each planet has one sign of exaltation. So you'll notice that 5 of the signs have no planet exalted in them. So again, we're arranged as like with the Thema Mundi, so Cancer is rising here. And now the planets are arranged, again, there's a whole bunch of things here that we could talk about. But one just basic thing, and this is something I believe Ben Dyke, the scholar Benjamin Dykes also pointed out, or that's where I heard it from anyways, is that the sun here is up at the top of the chart, and the sun is the brightest planet. And then we just sort of zigzag back and forth from the brightest planet to the dimmest. So the sun is the brightest, followed by the moon, followed by Venus, followed by Jupiter, followed by Mars, followed by Mercury, and then Saturn is the dimmest planet, is found at the bottom. So it's kind of like an ordering of the planets from brightest to dimmest, as well as some other things as well. We notice that all of the signs that the planets are in all form whole sign aspects to Cancer. That's important, and there's some other things as well. So the idea of so the sun is said to be exalted in Aries, the moon is exalted in Taurus, Venus is exalted in Pisces, Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, Mars is exalted in Capricorn, Mercury is exalted in Virgo, and Saturn is exalted in Libra. And so a planet that's in the sign in which it is exalted is thought to be an honored guest. It doesn't rule that sign, except for Mercury. Mercury, of course, following this pattern of being like the one that breaks the rules, Mercury is actually exalted in a sign that Mercury also rules. But for the other 6 planets, they're exalted in signs that are ruled by someone else. So it's not their sign, it doesn't belong to them, but they're an honored guest and are thought to do very well there. And again, we can develop this a little bit more in 2 weeks, but that's what you should know for now. And a planet that's found in the sign opposite to the sign that they're exalted in, that planet is said to be in its fall, which is a difficult condition. So if the moon is in Scorpio, the moon would be in her fall, because Scorpio is opposite to Taurus, which is the sign that she's exalted in. All right, and then just summarizing a lot of what we've done today, just wrapping up here, last couple minutes. yeah, just summarizing all this stuff. So we've got the 12 signs here, and then the planet that rules each one of those signs, right? So Aries is ruled by Mars. Aries is a diurnal sign, it's a cardinal sign, and it's a fire sign. Now I've separated out the detriment, exaltation, and fall here because the detriment, exaltation, and fall are they're less important for defining the inherent meaning of the signs. All the meaning of the signs really comes out of who does it rule, what's the polarity, what's the quadruplicity, what's the triplicity. Those are what defines the inherent nature of the signs. And then detriment, exaltation, and fall is also important information and tells us more about the signs, but is less central to the sign's meaning. Yeah, so that's all the basic information here. And I'm going to suggest that this information here is really important to memorize. You should really know basically everything that's on the screen here. This is all really important stuff to just know. And students of Temple of the Silver Star memorize all of this information anyways as part of their coursework. And you should just know it. It's so foundational and fundamental to astrology. All right, and now again, this is not any new information. This is just a reorganization of all the information that was in the previous slide, and actually less. We're not dealing with the polarity, quadruplicity, and triplicity here, but now we're looking at it instead from the point of view of the planets. So instead of looking at like which planet rules and is exalted in a sign, we're looking at the planets and asking which signs do they rule, which sign is they exalted in, and where's their detriment and fall. And so again, you can see that the sun and moon only rule one sign each, right? The moon only has a night house, which is Cancer, and the moon is exalted in Taurus, has her detriment in Capricorn and her fall in Scorpio. And then with the other planets, like Venus here, Venus has her day house of Libra, her night house of Taurus, she's exalted in Pisces, and then in her detriment in the two signs opposite to Libra and Taurus of Aries and Scorpio, and then has her fall in Virgo, which is opposite to Pisces. And then so on for all the other planets. And so it's really helpful to know this information from this point of view as well. Again, it's the same information that was on the last slide, but now just reorganized to be from the point of view of the planets rather than from the point of view of the signs, right? And so it's really great to know that information from both directions. Both, if you think of a sign, you should know who rules it, who's in detriment there, who's in exaltation, who's in fall. And then if you think of a planet, you should know which signs does that planet rule, where is that planet exalted, where is it in detriment, where is it in fall. All right, yeah, we're running a little over time here, so we're not going to really, we've only built up some very basic concepts, but just, real quick, we can see that Jack Parsons has, and if you don't know who Jack Parsons is, I assume a lot of you do. If you don't, you might want to just look him up. He actually has a decent Wikipedia page, so if you just want to look up his Wikipedia page, that might be helpful, because I'll be using his chart as an example in some of our following classes, and there's a photo of Parsons there on the left. So his ascendant is at 11 degrees Gemini, so he is Gemini rising. And so he'll be characterized by the nature of Gemini, and Mercury will be the lord of his ascendant. So Mercury will be a particularly important planet in his chart because Mercury rules Gemini. And we see he has Saturn here in Cancer, right? So that's Saturn in detriment. So that's a difficult Saturn. We also notice that he's born during the night. The sun is here in the 5th house, and that's well below the horizon. So we know that this is a night chart. And indeed, we see that he was born at 8:45 p.m. In early October in Los Angeles, and that is indeed nighttime. So this is a night chart. So his sect light is the moon, and his sect light is up here in the 10th house in Pisces. So in addition to being characterized by Gemini, he'll also be a Piscean sort of person. And we will develop that further on. Venus will tend to be the most positive planet, Venus will be likely the most positive planet in the chart, and aspects to Venus will be very helpful. So Venus is in Scorpio here, which is sort of a difficult place for Venus to be, so there will be some struggle with Venus-related things, and we certainly see that in Parsons' life. But Venus is still going to tend to be the most positive part of his chart. So the other planets in Scorpio that are co-present with Venus will really benefit. So we have Mercury making a very close conjunction to Mars here. So we know that there's going to be a real deep relationship between his Mars and his Mercury. And indeed, they're also in Scorpio. So Mars is quite strong here. And Mars is also ruling, is the lord of both Mercury and Venus, because they're in a sign that Mars rules. But Venus being co-present will really benefit Mercury and Mars and help them out a lot. Mercury will also benefit Jupiter because she's making a square. This is especially a stronger, we'll talk a little bit more about different types of aspects. This is a strong form of a square called an overcoming square. So Venus helps out Jupiter here. And then Venus also makes a trine to the moon, and it's pretty close by degree. Venus is at 24 degrees Scorpio, and the moon is at 27 degrees Pisces. So that's a trine, and only separated by 3 degrees. So this is a pretty close trine. So the moon really benefits a lot. And that's helpful for Parsons because the moon is his sect light and really benefits from that relationship to Venus. Now Saturn, because this is a night chart, will tend to be the most difficult planet in the chart. So there'll be difficulty in, we haven't built up the meanings of the houses yet, but we'll see difficulty with second house related things. And then we can also see that because Saturn is making a square to the sun, and the sun is in Libra, which is the sign of the sun's fall. Libra is a difficult place for the sun to be, and is getting that square from the most difficult planet in the chart. Parsons will have a difficulty with solar things, and one of the meanings of the sun, and this is a really there's some other things in Parsons' life as well, but one really straightforward thing that we can delineate here is the sun can signify like the father, and Parsons' father was unfaithful to Parsons' mother, actually around the time that she was pregnant, and then shortly after his birth, he had been visiting a prostitute, and she kicks him out of the house and then divorces him. So Parsons never really knows his father. And actually later on, Parsons in an autobiographical statement is talking about the idea that because he grew up, never knowing his father, he grew up having a hatred of authority and of things related to authority, and he attributed that to his absent father. And so certainly having the sun afflicted, both in a sign that it doesn't like being, and receiving the square from the most difficult planet in the chart, could all signify some of that stuff. Let's see. W. Linden here is asking, is there a distinction between conjunction and co-presence? The term is new. Yeah, so generally, co-presence is used to just mean any planets that are in the same sign, and so they share a lot of things. And then conjunction is used when they're also very close by degree. So like in this example here, we would say that Mercury is conjunct Mars, right? They're separated by only a degree, but we wouldn't say that Mercury and Mars are conjunct Venus because they're separated by more than 20 degrees, but they are co-present with Venus because they're in the same sign as Venus. So yeah, I mean, that's just a way that this sort of terminology has developed. We don't have different words for like a trine that's just by sign or also by degree. There's just 2 different words for, essentially you could think of conjunction as like extra strong co-presence. It's co-presence that's also close by degree. Yeah. And again, we'll come back to Jack's chart in later classes. That's just some really basic stuff there, especially as we build up meanings of the houses and some more stuff about the signs as well. All right, so yeah, we're a little over time here, but just real quick, practices for the next 2 weeks. I'm suggesting to memorize the ruler, polarity, quadruplicity, and triplicity of the signs, as well as the domiciles, exaltations, detriments, and falls. And I suggest that you work on memorizing those both from the point of view of the signs as well as from the planets. So just saying Capricorn and knowing, that Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, that Mars is exalted there, but then also being able to say Mars, Mars rules, Aries and Scorpio, and Mars is exalted in Capricorn. So knowing that information kind of from both perspectives, is my suggestion that you just get all that down. That's really fundamental and will help out for everything we're going to do from here on out. And I hope also that seeing aspects, houses, and signs all together shows how deeply interrelated all these concepts are. All right, and I also suggest that you start looking at, even as you're just getting started, it's never too early to start looking at charts. So draw up your own chart, draw up charts of people you know. You can look at charts of public figures and things like that. Try to find, if you're looking at public figures, try to find people that have reliable birth times. We'll not talk about that here, but there's actually like a rating system for the sureness of birth times for public figures. And astro.com is a really great website to do this. They have lots of resources. You can create an account and save charts there. I think you can save up to 100 charts for free. And then just for a little bit of money, you can go up to 1,000 or something like that. But most of their tools are free. So that's a great website to draw charts. And they also have interpretive resources and other nice stuff as well. Also, I think it's great to start watching planetary movements, on a daily basis. And a great website to do this is a website called planetwatcher.com. It's really great for looking at just showing where the planets are, and it'll show at the present moment, and you can also sort of click back by hour, day, forward or backward in time by like hour, day, month, and year, and just look at where the planets were at any given time in a really easy way. That tool is really great. There's also some kind of information and stuff on that website that I do not endorse. The person who runs that website has some fairly idiosyncratic theories about some things, so I don't endorse any of that, but it's a great tool just for being able to look at the planets at any given time. And you can just sort of click around, advancing the chart by hours, days, months, years, and just looking at the different speed that things move, as well as, on a day-to-day basis, just tracking when planets change signs and things like that. That's all great stuff to start keeping track of. And then just in general, start researching and studying astrology. I think you should really investigate a lot of different traditions, ancient and modern, different schools of thought, different authors. There's lots of different approaches, and I definitely don't say that mine is the correct one or anything like that. So I really encourage you to do some research and to look at different traditions and different authors and different voices, and come to your own conclusions about things. The one thing I really do recommend, though, is that you try to think about some of the fundamental rationale, why things mean what they mean, and why things are set up the way that they are. I think that having that solid conceptual basis is really important, and is a really helpful thing for being able to understand stuff, is being able to build up from fundamental, clear, consistent, rational, integrated concepts. So just start your studies of astrology. If anybody wants more suggestions and like that, feel free to contact me. There's my email address there at provost@tots.org. Of course, you can always see our website, tots.org/FAQ, for more information. And as always, it's a $5 suggested donation for anyone who's not a member of either our academic or initiatory track. So thanks everybody. And in 2 weeks, we'll meet again, and we'll really zoom in on the individual signs of the zodiac, and we'll talk about how to use hexagram rituals to invoke specific zodiacal powers. I'm happy to hang out for a few more minutes. I know we're already over time, but if anybody has any questions or anything like that. Otherwise, we'll just meet again in 2 weeks. So for anybody watching on YouTube, thanks very much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to our channel to get updates on when new videos are posted. And of course, you can like us on Facebook to get updates there. And if you want to be added to our public mailing list, feel free to shoot me an email and I'll add you to the mailing list. All right, thanks everybody, 93s.